10 things I hate about watches. Well, actually, it's not 10 things I hate about watches because I don't really hate anything about watches. I don't really hate anything about many things in this world because I try to see things from a positive perspective, but there are 10 things that I probably don't really like about watches, or elements about watches that I prefer to sort of avoid, because I've found that when I've had these elements in watches that I tend to not really connect with them, or that I look at the watch and I go, I don't really like that. Should I wear this watch? No, I don't really like that element. Maybe I should get a different watch with a different element on it. But I don't think that would have looked very good on a thumbnail. Hello, you're watching James. My name is James, you're watching me, and I am talking about watches, and I'm talking about 10 things that I probably don't love about watches. Certain elements about specific watches that I tend to try to avoid, or that I've learned over the years of collecting that I actually don't particularly like. I sort of think, well, that's not really an element of a watch that I love. I actually learned to avoid that or go for something else. When it comes to these 10 things, however, I am very mindful to keep them in the back of my mind. I'm mindful for two reasons. Firstly, to avoid them so that I don't repeat a mistake. But secondly, to try and rethink about them as well, because my thoughts about watches do evolve. I do tend to like things now that I didn't really like before, so I do keep that in mind. However, as of this moment of making this video, there are 10 things that I tend to try to avoid. And number one, I'm sorry to say, is Rolex. And it's not for the normal reason, because when people talk about Rolex, there's a lot of people that say, well, why would you buy a Rolex? There are so much better quality watches that are cheaper out there. And I certainly get that. I think that's sort of a certainly understandable thing to say, and I agree with it. But I also see people who really know watches, really understand watches, that are super Rolex passionate people. And there's a reason for that, and I keep that in my mind. But when I look at Rolex, when I've handled Rolex, I have one particular feeling about every one that I've ever handled, and that is that I've been slightly underwhelmed. They've been okay. I look at them and think, it's a nice enough watch, but it hasn't excited me. I think, however, Rolex is one of those brands, especially if it was for me, I would need some more time with them. It's not a watch that I pick up and go, wow, I want to own this. Not at all. It's a watch I pick up and go, eh. But I think if I owned one longer term, I think perhaps I might develop that exciting feeling about it. But the reason I actually really don't like Rolex, or perhaps that's not a watch brand that attracts me, is that I don't really like their designs of watches. They're all okay. There's none that I look at that I go, yuck, but they're all like, eh. And I've handled quite a few different models. The Explorer, it's okay, but it doesn't excite me. The Submariner, I kind of like, but again, it's okay. There are other watches that I prefer much more. And that's really the reason why number one on this list is Rolex. Not because I hate it, it's just, it's not for me. And number two, let's stick with Rolex because Mercedes hands. It's taken me a long time to figure this one out because I've had many watches with Mercedes hands. In fact, the first mechanical watch that I owned, the watch that I wore for almost 10 years, has Mercedes hands. But I've realized as the years have gone by, as I've owned different watches, Mercedes hands are probably my least favorite sets of hands. In fact, most watches that I've owned with Mercedes hands, I look at and I think, wow, I like this watch, but if I was to change something, what would it be? It would be the handset. There are other hands that I prefer. In fact, when I think of Rolex, the one Rolex that actually does stand out to me is a Rolex Submariner, no date, with those mil-spec hands. So it doesn't have the Mercedes hands. That is the Rolex that actually stands out to me the most. So yes, not so much Rolex and not so much Mercedes hands. But let's move away from Rolex. Sorry, Rolex. Let's move on to straps, because I'm a big bracelet person, and for a long time, I thought that was the only type of strap that I liked on watches. Eventually, I was able to learn that I liked leather straps. I found a few now that I actually like. I learned that it was specific leather straps that I liked, specific leather straps that I didn't like. But when it comes to rubber straps, resin straps, and NATOs, I struggle with them. Rubber straps and resin straps, I sort of don't mind. You know, they're comfortable, they're very utilitarian. But for me, whenever I wear a watch on a rubber strap or a resin strap, it feels like I'm wearing a tool. It feels like I'm wearing something for a purpose, which that's not an issue. I understand it and I think that's fine, but I don't get that enjoyment from it. I don't ever look down at a watch on a rubber strap and think, wow, that's exciting. But I do that about watches on bracelets, and I do that on watches on nice leather straps. And then there's NATO straps. I just don't really like them. I don't like the look of them. They're quite comfortable on wrist. I've got nothing against that. In fact, NATO straps, I wish my opinions about them would change because I like the idea of having a different option to wear watches on, but I just don't really like them. It may also relate to my first mechanical watch again because I wore that on a NATO strap for almost 10 years. So perhaps my whole problem with Mercedes hands and NATO straps is that I've already done that, I've already been there, and I maybe overdid it. Now, I'm very sorry for all of you out there, but the fourth watch or type on this list is quartz watches. And again, I don't hate quartz watches. In fact, I actually rather like quartz watches, and they make a lot of sense to me. They're cheaper, they're more accurate, you don't really need to service them. It makes a lot of sense to me, but I really struggle to connect with quartz watches. Every quartz watch I've ever owned, I struggle to connect with. In fact, most of them have then moved out of my collection. And I've often tried to consider why that is. Why is a mechanical movement grab my attention and a quartz movement not? And I think there's a few reasons for that. But it's quite interesting to see though that I do have a few watches that are non-mechanical watches in my collection, but all of them have an interest factor to them. My Accutron Spaceview 2020, well, that's funky, interesting, fun. It has a really unique movement in it, and I really like it. Okay, that's not a quartz watch, but then my Bulliver Computron is a LED watch, and as you can see, it's a really funky, interesting, fun watch as well. And I guess the interest factor of those two watches outweigh the sort of dislike for non-mechanical watches. And the last one is my Casio Royale that I have modified with the SKX mod kit. And again, there is something different to it, something interesting to it, and I do like that Casio. Number 5 is Cyclopses. I just don't like them. I just don't connect with them. Every time I've owned a watch with a Cyclops, I keep looking at it and thinking, why is that there? Why have they put that on there? Does it really magnify? And when it does, do I really need that? In fact, I think it just sort of messes up the dial a little bit. And every time I've had a watch with a Cyclops, I've thought to myself, I wish they just removed that. And that wasn't until recently when I had a watch, an affordable watch from Aliexpress that had an internal Cyclops. And strangely enough, not only did I like that, I actually thought it was a great feature of the watch. In fact, I'm actually going to look for other watches with that internal Cyclops. So it's obviously just that thing sitting on top of the crystal that I don't like. It's not so much the Cyclops, it's just the type of Cyclops. So I can see now, and I understand now, that I'm not going to buy watches with those external Cyclopses anymore, but I am going to search out watches with internal Cyclopses because it then becomes a feature rather than a negative for me. Number 6 revolves around sizes of watches, in particular small watches, and this bugs me. This bugs me that I have this opinion because I wish I could wear smaller watches. I wish I could wear watches under 37 millimeters because then I could really buy lots of vintage watches. There are other watches out there that I think look fantastic, but every time I've had a watch that is sub 37 millimeters and realistically probably sub 38 millimeters, I just struggle to want to wear it. Every time I put it on, I just keep thinking, I wish this was a little bit bigger. Oh, does it look a little bit funny? And I actually don't think it looks funny. It's just my personal take on it when I've got it on wrist that I have that experience with. I do hope one day this evolves, however, because I would like some small watches in my collection. That brings me to number 7 on this list, and that is loud ticking watches. This doesn't happen too often, but occasionally you'll get a watch mechanical movement or going back to a quartz movement, and it's just really loud. My vintage watch is one of these. It's so loud. And this Timex that I bought recently, this is a quartz Timex, which I actually quite like, but it is so loud that I struggle to wear it because it ticks so loudly. I can hear it on my wrist. These two watches, when they are running, I can't have them out in my watch box because I can hear the ticking. It's too loud, so they end up having to be hidden away to block that noise. It's just too much. I don't enjoy it. I actually enjoy the normal, subdued ticking noise. I like listening to my watch, but I don't like listening to my watch from this sort of distance away. It slightly bugs me. It slightly bugs me when it gets into my ear and then that's all I can hear. And then we come up to number 8 on this list, and that is titanium watches. This seems to be quite a popular thing at the moment. A lot of brands are doing titanium watches. A lot of people are really happy about that because they're getting another material, another look, and getting a lighter watch on wrist. For me, I've realised I don't like a light watch on wrist. Or at least if it is a light watch, again I start associating things more like it's a tool watch, like wearing a Casio or a G-Shock. I don't really like that feel on wrist. I've got nothing against the material. I've got nothing against people liking this watch. I think that's fantastic. But every time I've had hands-on with a titanium watch, in the couple of examples that I've owned myself, I've struggled to connect with them. And I've realised this actually connects partly back to quartz watches, is that I like a certain weight on wrist. I like to feel the watch, and there's a certain weight range that I do appreciate. And being titanium kind of takes away from that. So I've learned, for me personally, titanium is not for me. Now, I'm sorry to anybody that likes this, but number 9 on this list is the day and date next to each other at the 3 o'clock. I think it just ruins the dial of a watch. I actually quite like having dates on watches. It's very useful to have. And as you can see on this Oris that I have, I think it's placed really well. And in fact, it adds to the look of the watch versus taking away from the look of the watch. But when you have watches that at 3 o'clock have this big, large rectangle of date, I think it just takes away from the watch. It is very utilitarian again. It's very useful to have it sitting there, but I think it spoils the dial of the watch. And in fact, it stops me buying certain watches. There are quite a few watches that I'm quite keen to own, but they have this date, and I know from my previous experiences with this that it annoys me. It bugs me enough that I don't want it in my collection. So that is a certain thing that I do avoid now. And unfortunately, this happens a lot in Seikos. And that bugs me more because I love Seiko and there's lots of Seikos that I want to own, but this date, it just ruins it a little bit for me. And that brings me to the final thing, and it is the biggest thing on this list, and it relates to everything on this list, and that is what I hate most about it is that I have this list. I hate that I don't like certain things about certain watches. I hate that this puts restrictions on me to buy and own certain watches. I would like to have less restrictions. I like the idea of being able to own small watches, be able to put different straps on watches, to be able to experience a Rolex if I was ever in that opportunity or have that sort of money available. I would like to be able to put a Cyclops on a watch or a date or any of these things and not be annoyed by it or not sort of feel that it's a detraction from the watches. Number 10 is me. Number 10 is my personal dislikes about certain things. I hate that I have that. I hate that I'm limiting myself. But it is kind of understandable. This is pretty normal. We can't like everything, but I am very aware that things like this do evolve. So I think it is important, if there's things that you dislike about watches now, learn about it, apply it to your own watch collecting. However, don't then just write things off, revisit them. Doesn't mean you need to go and buy it and then go, yeah, that's not the watch for me again. But at least think about it, because things do change. I now wear watches on leather straps and I never thought I would do that. So it's worth revisiting things. So that's my 10 things I hate about watches, which aren't really hate. They're more things that I just don't particularly gel with or really like. I would really be interested to know, is there anything that I should have added to this list that bugs you? Leave a comment down below. I truly would like to know. And after you do that, maybe watch these videos next.